This episode has been brought to you in part by the Azrieli Music Prizes, celebrating 10 years of promoting excellence in music composition. Come experience the musical imaginations of AMP's 4 extraordinary 2024 laureates. The Orchestre Symphonique de Montréal Chorus and Maestro Andrew McGill give the world premiere of their prize-winning works for the AMP Gala concert on October 28th at Maison Symphonique in Montreal. Learn more at azrielifoundation.org/AMP.
This is Bonjour Chai, the Dishy Vicar edition. I'm Avi Feingold, and I'm here with Phoebe Maltzbovy and special guest host Megan Daum. We are your Frozen Chosen. On today's episode, we are all in on Nobody Wants This, the new Netflix rom-com with hot rabbis, angry Jewesses, and of course Tova Feldshuh. Plus, stay tuned. We talk about Donald Trump's commemoration of October 7th by visiting the Lubavitcher Rebbe's grave. All this and more coming right up. The show that we're talking about, Nobody Wants This, is about a rabbi and a podcaster who fall in love. The podcaster is not Jewish. She's about to get $1 million Spotify deal of some kind or another, but she already lives a very rich life, apparently. But so does he. So we're not going to deal with that.
It's television. It's
of
the
course,
magic of the
it's
movies.
heightened realism. So when we decided that we wanted to talk about it, Phoebe was just like, I know exactly who we have to bring on to the show. Megan Daum. So Phoebe, can you explain to us who Megan Daum is and why she's the perfect person to bring on to talk about Nobody Wants This?
Yes. So Megan is the author of 6 books, the most recent of which is The Problem with Everything, My Journey Through the New Culture Wars. She's really one of the premier American essayists. She's written for all the major publications like the Los Angeles Times, the New York Times, the New Yorker, and more. But it's an essay from her 2001 collection, My Misspent Youth, that made me think we specifically had to have her on now as versus just in general, because I wanted to have her on in general, it's the essay called American Shiksa. So there are a lot of stories about Jewish men and non-Jewish women in the culture, but they're rarely from the non-Jewish woman's perspective. And in fact, I really couldn't think of another one really aside from your essay. So that's why we thought now is the time. So welcome, Megan.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I have not talked about American Shiksa in maybe almost 30 years. Well, no, maybe 25 years. So this is truly a treat.
So that's a good place to start. How has the American Shiksa evolved over the past 30 years?
We're more powerful than ever. I have to say that this piece was in GQ in 1996, and I was probably 25 when I wrote it. I was a big Philip Roth fan, and I was like a big fan of the new journalism, and I was a very ambitious young writer, and I was very voicey, and I was very caught up in my own prose stylings, and also being very edgy. But I remember reading maybe like Portnoy's Complaint in particular. Yeah, and just thinking that I wanted to do some kind of fun essay that was like the Shiksa point of view of that. And so it was, and you know, I lived in New York, and I dated a lot of Jewish men. What can I say? I mean, not a lot.
That's so interesting that you say 1996, because I had wondered about that, because so the Seinfeld episode, known for coining Shiksa appeal, appeared in 1997. So that seems to have been a moment when this concept was, it's not certainly when it first emerged, because like obviously Philip Roth, Woody Allen, this was a concept already around. I'm trying to think how much sort of post-2001 one would really hear about the Shiksa as a concept. Like I know you would see various sort of like, it's very problematic to say Shiksa type content in the it's very problematic era. Right. But diversity became such in the culture and in representations, especially, that the idea that there's this landscape where there are, on the one hand, the white blonde people, and on the other hand, the brunette Jews, and that's who there is, just seems very of a certain moment that just seems... But then I think about Curb Your Enthusiasm, so maybe not.
Right. It's definitely niche. I mean, it's kind of an in-joke that sort of some people just never stopped making, maybe. Yeah, it's funny. So I remember, did I even pitch that piece? I think it's pretty unpitchable. It may have been, yeah, the editor of the piece was my friend Steve Fraiman. I'll just shout him out. Like I said, I was probably 25 and living in New York, and editors would take you out to lunch and stuff. And I was this little 25-year-old and probably made some joke, or I probably said something like, I want to write something from the Shiksa point of view. And he probably said, write that for us, sort of
so
thing.
much more glamorous than these days.
I know. It was. I mean, it was a Carrie Bradshaw going to lunch with editors all the time. I remember vividly faxing it to the magazine. So I had the piece. I wrote it. I printed it out on my printer, my dot matrix printer in my apartment, and I faxed it to GQ offices. And Steve, I remember he was standing over the fax machine, and he was probably to hide it from the other editors, and reading it page by page. And he called me after, like, you know, he had read the first page or something, and he's like, I love it. I love this. It's coming out of the fax machine right now. I can't wait. And it was in the magazine, and I know, like, other editors were very offended by it. And I mean, in retrospect, it's a pretty offensive piece. It's very much of its time. And I don't even really remember what the response was. I think it was fairly negative, but that was what you wanted back then. So.
I mean, I think I probably know better than you do a little bit about this, just because I ended up citing your piece. I read the essay and thought it was very funny, but yes, obviously offensive and of its time, but like, I don't hold that against it, if that makes sense.
Well, thank you.
I was writing about philo-Semitism and the new philo-Semitism, which is very much about this kind of aligning yourself with anti-wokeness and all of these different things. And I just was contrasting that to what you write about, which is really much more a draw to possibly romantically to Jews, although it seems like you don't really get it in the other direction. I don't feel like you ever, I can attest, there are non-Jewish men who have a thing for Jewish women, but I feel like this doesn't have any particular, like it did in 19th century France. There was like Belle Juive literature. There was, but this doesn't seem to exist much now.
Yeah. So, I mean, if I can, think about that a bit. First of all, the first comment that I had, and I think was interesting, is the only way that you could be a shiksa nowadays and it have real appeal or to have any sort of tension is the person you're falling in love with is a rabbi. Because nowadays, right, there's nobody else that it would be tension with. Of course, yeah, we're going to get married and that's what it's going to be. So that was the first thing that really struck me about the show. But then the flip side, because I know that Phoebe is really going to get into the natalism question, and like the shiksa appeal is really the question, and the marrying Jewish is about having Jewish babies. I'm like, what if this had been flipped? What if it was two brothers who had this sex podcast and one of them falls in love with a woman who is a rabbi, and would the same tension exist or not? And so I guess that's a perfect spot to like get into it and sort of ask these sort of questions, like, what is it about the show that people are responding to? Is it just the Jewish content, or is it that it's a rabbi, or is it that, what's going on here?
Avi, can I just ask a question back at you? Because this is where we need your rabbinical input, as it were. Who are they? Like, what denomination? Because like, on the one hand, this is clearly not an Orthodox rabbi. He is socializing without any head covering on in non-kosher observing settings. Like, they all seem to, all the Jews on the show have a big, giant Star of David necklace to identify them as such. In any state of dress or undress, it's interesting. But they're clearly not very, very religious. But they're also so sort of traditionalist that they're using the term shiksa in this very...
Yeah,
like,
so
it's
that's
just, I
where
can't
it's
tell who they are. Like,
Let's
where
be
do they?
honest.
So, Avi, who are they? And where are they?
So many clues without mentioning anything, and that's designed, I think, to draw people in without confusing them as to the intricacies of what goes on within Judaism. So it's not Orthodox Judaism, and it's not conservative Judaism, because conservative rabbis tend to be fairly observant, and there's a lot of stuff here that isn't observant, right? You don't go out after services to a bar you're going to go home to dinner for Shabbat. It's clear to me that they're trying to code this as reform, even though it could be other liberal denominations. Other liberal denominations wouldn't necessarily have such lavish, such large congregations, such large temples. And temple is really one of those words that is really embraced by
then why?
Yeah, so
who are the Reform Jews? So this comes up in Jessica Gross's New York Times review of the show, pan of the show, I should say. Yeah, the fact that this is a rabbi allows for the kind of star-crossed lovers crossed with Hallmark movie, whatever this is that's going on here. But let's say he were a Reform rabbi, could he not marry a non-Jewish woman?
This is the big debate and the big question, and this couldn't have come at a better time because only recently did the Reform movement allow rabbinical students to be in interfaith relationships. Right. So as of last year, if you wanted to be a Reform rabbi, you couldn't even enter the rabbinical school if you were married to somebody that isn't Jewish. And now you can. I'm not going to get into the other denominations, but there's a denomination that would say that you can be a rabbi if you are married to somebody that isn't already Jewish. Would you think that it would make a difference if, for example, the genders were swapped?
Well, I think it would be a lot more interesting if it was two bro podcasters and one of them started dating a rabbi. Like if it was sort of, Chris Williamson and Joe Rogan, if they had a podcast together and Chris started dating a rabbi, like that would be amazing. Well, we should say that this show was created by a woman named Erin Foster. She's the daughter of David Foster, the film
composer, the hits. He's a Canadian legend. If he cannot come on a Canadian show, and I mean he is Canadian. He was a big hit maker in Canada. He did a lot of pop in the 90s. We can say it like that. And he's married to Catherine McPhee. That's the other thing we can say. So his daughter, who converted, is older than her stepmom.
Nice.
Yeah, okay. So she did convert, and this was part of her writing, was to talk about the experiences of being the shiksa who then converted,
right?
And that's a big part of the process. And I have heard her talk about in interviews that the conversion classes are almost overwhelmingly women, and most of them are not necessarily doing it for a partner. They're doing it because they want to. You would think that it's all filled with women who are doing it for their partner, but it's not always the case.
But maybe they're doing it for their hoped for partner of some Jewish man someday. I
know. Look, I have a friend who is she's in her late 60s. She might be 70-year-old lesbian who is converting to Judaism.
But for a partner or just for herself?
No, she's realized that she wants to
long-time listener, first-time convert.
And she's doing this. That would be a good show.
I would watch that probably more than I would watch this.
Okay, but to answer your question about this show, I think the reason it's set up the way it is because obviously Erin Foster, who's married to a guy named Simon Tickman, who I believe his parents are Russian emigres, which might explain why the character who plays the rabbi's mother has some sort of indeterminate foreign accent. I guess it's supposed to be Russian.
I thought about that. I think it's supposed to be Israeli. That's
Israeli.
But we're gonna. That's my.
Okay, no, we're gonna have to. We're gonna have to talk about this mother's accent and just generally who she's supposed to be in a moment.
We're gonna have to get to that in a moment. So obviously the reason the show is set up the way it is because it's the story of the creator of the show, Barry Common. And getting back to your initial question, is there a sort of equivalent? Look, I mean, I certainly know Gentile men who are drawn to Jewish women because they're intense and intellectual, and they can exoticize them in a certain way. I don't know. I mean, for me, when I was younger, if I could sort of frame myself or work with this framing of the shiksa Jewish guy dynamic, it was a way of exoticizing myself. Otherwise I was boring, I thought. And if I could watch Annie Hall, or if I could be the Diane Keaton character in Manhattan, was incredibly influential to me. And at the time I didn't realize that she was supposed to be a huge pill. That was not an appealing character, but in my 20-year-old brain, I thought, oh, this is the way to be. This is awesome. Guys will love this.
But then I do want to talk about the whole thing of so a lot of the criticism of the show has been that it is nasty about Jewish women. But what I thought was interesting, and this made me think specifically of your essay, Megan, is that there's some weird part of it that comes across as almost like envy of Jewish women because they are so like near to Jewish men or something. Like there's some line where the Joanne character, the one who likes the rabbi, is saying that she bets the ex-girlfriend has really thick hair or something. Yes. And like she's sort of apologizing that she has fine blonde hair and that it's like that it's not that she's like balding.
No, she has a lot of it.
She has a lot of it.
Very. I related to that. I related to that line. He says he lost his watch. He said her hair was so thick and full that
I think that was the whole point. Was that it was all a joke.
So this is basically the universe of the show, at least as of the first 5 or 6 episodes, basically does not have non-Jewish men, with the exception of Joanne's father, who is gay, and his partner.
Right. Who's emasculated. Yes.
Right. So there basically there are no Gentile men in this world. There's basically this one hot rabbi is the last eligible straight man, and all the women are after him. But the Jewish women specifically are kind of grotesque. Like there's this scene where at the temple, they're all kind of like, meet my daughter, you know?
Yeah, the yentas are foisting they're plain. And I wouldn't say grotesque.
But it's the presentation is grotesque. No, I don't mean that the actresses playing them are actresses. They look fine. But I mean, like, it's this idea that these are women who cannot get a man. And then there's a later scene when he's like a camp counselor, and there's some teenage girls, some of whom are very pretty, but then the one they focus on is a sort of plain teenage girl whose hookup, whatever friend with benefits, won't be seen in public with her, and that, like, you don't want to be a Shoshana, because this is Shoshana, and you don't want to be a Shoshana. And then, of course, there are the women in the family who are all like, it doesn't appear to be that it's a religious thing. It seems much closer to something like Black women being perhaps, I'm not speaking for the entirety of Black women, but a situation in which there are some Black women upset that a Black man who's considered an eligible bachelor is dating a white woman.
It's
kind
dynamic.
Of that. Yeah. It's that dynamic, right? And it comes across much more that the women care about this, and the men are sort of like easy breezy.
Oh, the men kind of are into it.
They all know, they're into it.
You know, if wink, wink, like, you go, son.
Yes.
Let's just get this out of the way. I don't like the show. The show is not funny to me. It's not Seinfeld or Curb Your Enthusiasm, because let's face it, it's made by a shiksa. It's not going to be that good. It's not good. I mean, we can't do it. We're not able to do this kind of a funny show. Maybe with rare
not about
exception.
Jews, exactly.
Unfortunately,
she's not Jewish.
You could,
but
she
can't make the show.
Yes.
Okay.
I think that my sense was that there were clearly some really knowledgeable Jews in the writers' room where some really insidery things were done, but by the end of the show, it started falling really flat.
It's a total basic bitch show, is what it is. I mean, that's what it is. I thought it was pretty anti-Semitic. I was actually pretty shocked. And, you know, it's funny because I did not get the memo that shiksa was a bad word now. I just always thought it was funny. And just last night, I was talking to a very old friend of mine who is Jewish, and we were talking about the show, and she felt similarly about it. And she said, I can't believe that they're saying the word shiksa over and over again. Like, she's like, that's a bad word. She said, that's like saying the N-word. And I said, really? I didn't know that. I said, you call me that all the time. You've been calling me that for 30 years, as long as we've known each other. And she said, well, I'll call you that. But, you know, you're like one of us. Like, you're so shiksa that you're in the tribe in a way. But I don't know. It is a very strange premise for a show. And clearly, like, maybe what they should have done is like set it in the 2000s or something. Like,
it could have been anywhere between like 2005 and like 2012.
Well, no,
and maybe would have made sense.
It couldn't have been because between 2005 to 2012, there would be no chance that a rabbi would have thought about marrying somebody that isn't Jewish or been in a relationship with that. You're finally at an inflection point where that is actually a juicy storyline, because anything before now, it's not believable. Right? It's still it's absolutely.
But the rabbi, I think we just have to talk about the rabbi aspect of it is not like, it's what the love interest, the hot rabbi, Rabbi Noah, he is torn between what he thinks is his duty as a rabbi of living his life in a way that his congregants find admirable or whatever, and, you know, following his heart, whatever. But then there's also like the day-to-day opposition he gets to being with a shiksa, scare quotes around it if you must.
I find it very old-fashioned, and I'm surprised that it's doing as well as it is. I think it's the critics hate it, but maybe the ratings are good, whatever that means anymore.
Look, I think it's succeeding because it's a rom-com, and there's this whole zeitgeisty thing about there's a return to rom-coms now, and people just want these simple romantic storylines. I think that that's there. I think the women being nasty thing, I saw it right away. I was very fascinated by this, and I think that this is, whether the writer realizes this or not, is doing something really, really deep and important. And it's pitting the women who are saying, don't marry somebody not Jewish, with the man or the men that are saying, I don't know, you should, you shouldn't, you think of that. And to me, this is so obvious. The women are bearing the brunt of this natalist approach to Judaism. Right? You think I don't want to be having fun and meeting cool, tall Shagets guys, right, that are actually good basketball players? I want to meet those people, but no, I have to go and I have to bear the next generation of Jewish children. And I'm stuck with these nebbish Jewish men, and I'm mad about it because you shouldn't get to do this, but you are doing this, and this is a problem. And
why don't they just marry a tall,
because they feel this Jewish guilt of the previous generation of being. I'm not saying that it can. Yeah. I'm saying that this is what they are feeling, and this is what they are expressing with their disapproval and their anger at their lifestyles. Like, I married this guy. Like, what did I do with my life? I should have gone and done this because I didn't realize you could. And here's the rabbi going and saying, maybe I should. Yes. So that's there. That's huge. And then what happens is with the rabbi and the thing that makes it interesting that it's a rabbi, he's not making it about natalism. He's not talking about having babies and saying that you have to have Jewish babies. He's doing the thing that I actually talk about.
He does.
Oh, he does, maybe at some point. But I think the show does a good job of at least taking, from a reform perspective, somebody dealing with the fact that to him, marrying somebody Jewish is about marrying somebody who shares values with him.
If this is indeed based on a true story, and it sounds like it really is, it seems like where this is headed is conversion, and that she is going to join him in the Jewish. But I do think, Avi, that you're right, that there is something kind of systemic going on here about why the women are mad, but I think it's something different. I don't think it's about the bearing the brunt of the Jewish natalism. But what I want to say is that the bigger piece maybe is it feels very man shortage, the show. It feels very much like the Richard Reeves, men are falling behind. There's this one last man who's of any romantic interest. And it really reminds me of, so I still have not seen Fleabag. I know there's a hot priest in Fleabag, and I need to see it for so many reasons, but there's also the Dishy Vicar in Keeping Up Appearances, the 1990s Britcom that I really, really like and mention probably too much. But the Dishy Vicar...
I wish that was on a bumper sticker, because I will...
You would have the Dishy Vicar.
I have so many friends to give this to.
I'm sure you could get that printed, but he's not particularly attractive. I mean, he, like, enough, I guess, but it's like he is the young-ish, attractive-ish man in their little town. So he's the Dishy Vicar. And there's something about the show that I think fits very much with this idea that men these days are useless, good-for-nothings. And here's one who seems like husband material, father material maybe, and that he's like a good man, right? He's a good man.
Yeah, he's moral.
He's a good man, a kind
there's
man.
a trad.
Yes.
Right? I think there's a trad aspect here too, because he thinks about morals and ethics, and he does the right thing. And her whole thing is that's just stupid. We're gonna be raunchy, and that this is beneath us. And so I mean, I have only seen a few episodes, but I can imagine this sort of mapping itself onto the larger discussion about values, and people are sick of like the sort of millennial raunch thing. And
totally. But just to bring it back to the angry women, because I think it does all connect. I think it's that there's this idea that there just are not enough men to go around.
Yeah.
Not enough in the Jewish community specifically, and just generally. And the reason that there's all this hysteria over, and I use the term intentionally, over this rabbi possibly being with this breath of fresh air shiksa, is because they somehow all want to be with him. Even the camper, like there's one of the girls at the summer camp, like she doesn't want him to pair off because like she has her sights on him in a decade or something. Like there's one man, you know? And I think that's what comes through. It's just this idea of scarcity. Because I'm thinking like, why there are other men? Why? He's not that charismatic. He's, but it's like that he's the only one.
Yeah, we do see her going on a lot of dates, and the guys are like playing video games and are good for nothing. Look, this is a whole other conversation, but the scarcity complex, people do overblow it in their minds, but I think there's truth to it.
Oh, no, there is
especially
truth to it.
In big
There is
cities,
truth to it, yeah.
there are not as many educated men of the sort that these educated women want. But I do think, back in terms of like the way that Jewish women were portrayed, I think we should discuss the inciting incident that gets him to break up with the long-term girlfriend in the first episode.
Okay, yes.
Which is this is not a spoiler because it's in the first episode, right?
Is.
This is incredible detail. So he's living with this, nice Jewish girl for a long time. He comes home and she suddenly got like a ring on her finger. Like she's suddenly wearing an engagement ring.
She's proposed to herself.
And so what happened? And he says, what is this? What are you wearing? What is this? And she goes, yeah, I found it. Basically, she went through his stuff. She went into his drawer and found an engagement ring, assumed that he was going to give it to her, and just decided to like cut to the chase and put it on herself. And, we might as well be engaged. Why go through the formality of you having to propose to me? Obviously, you were going to anyway. It's such a bizarre thing to do. And so clearly like a deal breaker in my mind that I don't see why.
It's bizarre, and it's very of a piece with the portrayal of Jewish women as just extra, like the desperate straight woman, the needy straight woman,
and the nag, more
so, yes, and the emasculating aspect, like that she's going to take the man's role of proposal, like because he's upset. So this is what I found a little bit ridiculous because he says that he's upset because he had wanted to do a romantic proposal to her. But it seems like that's not really it. Like, he's upset because she rifled through his stuff and
he was ambivalent.
And he didn't actually
want
to
marry
her.
He wasn't going to.
He wasn't going to.
He's hiding behind that. That's an excuse, obviously.
So can we talk about the mother and the accent and where she's... So
yes.
Is this Tova Felcha?
Tova Felcha, who, it's like they plucked her up from Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, which is a brilliant show about a Jewish girl.
What she plays, we can talk about, is the accent Israeli? Is it supposed to be Russian, former Soviet Union?
It's like Transylvanian or something sometimes.
It's like she's the Yiddish, sort of the Yiddish-speaking Taylor character from like the 1970s. She's like an old world refugee, not a Soviet refugee, like really, really old world.
Yes.
Possibly Holocaust survivor. It does not make sense generationally at all. Nothing about her.
Right.
This is my theory behind the show, is that these are people like who are based on tropes and people who may be living their lives. It could be that the show creator is indeed in her real life very informed by tropes. Whether or not you've actually seen Annie Hall, this is in the culture. And it all just feels very informed by ideas of like who a Jewish mother is that you could get from watching South Park. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It doesn't seem necessarily that this is about actual people. It's about tropes that come from different eras when you maybe would find some actual people who seem a little like this. And then, but what's so jarring though, is then you have this modern world where they have, again, like the diverse friend group. There's a woman rabbi who seems pretty chill, suddenly appears, manifests in a later episode.
Yeah. Well, it's camp. It's not suddenly appears.
By suddenly appears, I mean complicates things. It's a little bit less stereotyped character suddenly.
Perhaps, but she also is clear to say that she's of a different generation. She was his camp counselor.
But the women of, like, the women of his generation are...
They're the ones that are torn between their parents' values and old worldy sort of stuff.
No, they are japs, is what they are. That's the derogatory term for what they are. Because they don't want to have sex because they don't want their hair mussed. They're that type. But they are. That is how they are presented on the show. This is not me... Yeah. Trying to, because that's the whole thing, is that what he's drawn to in her, in Joanne, is that she's like sexually free, unlike these frigid Jewish.
It's unreal how we have not moved forward from Portnoy's complaint. Right?
But I know we have in so many ways.
But I think we have, and that's why
Joey Soloway, like Transparent, was an incredibly Jewish show. I know that was not the main point of it; it was about gender, but like it was done so much better.
Or Broad City. They go on
yes.
Birthright.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's just a sloppily done show.
Can we talk before? I don't want to let this drop. The podcasting career as represented on this
Yeah, what
show.
are we doing wrong, Phoebe? We need to take some lessons from.
So when I was watching this, there's this scene early on where Joanne, the podcaster, who is simultaneously in her mid-40s and in her mid-20s, is lying in bed in her luxurious family wealth / podcast funded home. And I couldn't help but notice, I couldn't help but wonder that she looked exactly like Carrie Bradshaw. This is Carrie Bradshaw. And not just, single gal, whatever, but it's like, this is specifically what they did on the remake of Sex and the City that I had the good fortune to watch in an airplane. And Just Like That, it's called, where Carrie Bradshaw is reborn as a podcast host. And that's how she now makes her living, although she's married to Biggs, whatever. But it's just like this very strange world where being a podcaster has to be visually represented as like your hair is all did and like.
Is it?
Well, you do have to be on YouTube now. So
if I can ask, is the tension here because back in the era of Carrie Bradshaw, you could be doing what she was doing and make a lot of money because the media world was still fairly focused, and now everybody has a podcast, and to think that you're going to be the ones that are breaking through to the million level and getting these deals with Spotify and making all of this money is a lot more unrealistic.
I think it's pretty analogous, actually, because it was improbable that Carrie Bradshaw would have made enough money doing what she did to live how she did. I mean, that was discussed constantly. So we know, it's TV show. So she has a much nicer apartment than anything she could afford. The freelance writing business was as much a winner take all economy as podcasting. I mean, would you say, is that fair to say, Phoebe?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I would also say that this is just like a thing that's always unrealistic on any show is the amount of time people spend working versus
going to brunch,
personal life drama. Exactly, going to brunch. But then again, the doctors on House spend a lot of time gossiping about their love lives too. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like, I think that some of that is just, I would allow it because of that. But what frustrated me was more just like, what is supposed to be the point of this podcast and who's listening to it? Is this something like, I don't really.
Yeah, well, there's a whole world. I just got done talking about Kamala Harris going on Call Her Daddy, that podcast, which I had not been familiar with until now, which apparently is the biggest, the biggest girl podcast of all. And
it's not Red Scare.
No, we are in such a bubble. Okay.
Joking.
No, I know.
Yeah.
I would have said so, but no, this kind of like very basic, like you go girls, just talking about sex, keeping it real, doing a deep dive. Let's get into it. Like this kind of thing is huge. I mean, Alex Cooper has $60 million Spotify deal for Call Her Daddy. So I suppose it's possible that these girls on this show, these characters could have, a big audience for the kind of podcasting that they do. I mean, there's a wide audience for it.
To wrap things up, without changing necessarily the realism factor of podcasting, is there something that this show could have done better to actually make this something that we could sink our teeth into with joy and not just as a hate watch? Megan?
Well, it could have just been better written. I have no problem with the premise.
Phoebe?
Oh.
I don't. That's there. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, yes, better written. I think just consistency in the show's universe. Is this supposed to be? And I don't mean consistency in the sense of like set it at the correct year where it would all be consistent, but just the way it seems to want to have its cake and eat it with being diverse and modern and all of this, but also trade in these very old tropes and seem like it's all happening in 1962 or 1992 or whatever. Something about that does not sit right to me. So pick a year.
And that's what I would do is it's not so much pick a year, but pick a lane. And they're trying to pull on this without talking about it too much, the natalism thing, because it doesn't end up being about the values until later. And the values discussion, I think, would have been so much more interesting to me, but it's hard to convey that. That's not fun. And I think that that's where the interesting discussion lies. But again, that's why I'm not writing and I'm on a podcast that is not a Spotify million deal.
But if
that's it. Okay.
Spotify, if you're listening, Avi and I are available to be gazillionaires.
Yes, we absolutely are available. Okay, I do want to move on, and you did just mention Kamala Harris, but I do want to move on to thinking about the way in which Donald Trump commemorated October 7th was he went to the grave of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who was one of the most famous rabbis of the 20th century, the leader of the Chabad movement, Chabad Lubavitch movement. His grave is in Queens, and he went to visit that grave and to offer a prayer. He was there with Ben Shapiro. I thought it to be a fairly odd choice. I wasn't sure if Phoebe, you had any initial thoughts.
I mean, I'm intrigued by Ben Shapiro's centrality as the sort of the stand-in for all Jews.
You'd think that
Trump,
Jared Kushner
also,
might actually, fit in, but
because
really not.
So I have the Trump thing. I just my eyes at this point kind of glaze over because he's been having this same tired line like, come on, I love the Jews, why don't the Jews vote for me? Come on, Jews, if you don't vote for me, look, who knows what's coming for you? I love the Jews, they're so rich, they're so good with money, I love the Jews. That's the Trump line, right? But then there was just this big Jordan Peterson essay about, also an October 7th reflection about why Jews shouldn't be liberal and why you get what's coming to you Jews if you're liberal, whatever. And he has some passage where he says he's in a special position to observe all of this due to his friendship and entrepreneurial relationship or something. I forget, he phrases it some weird way with Ben Shapiro. So Ben Shapiro seems to be at the center of events. Yeah, I think Trump is in a funny spot now, right? Because on the one hand, he wants to play up this conception of the left as the home of anti-Semitism these days. On the other hand, the left, as represented in U.S. electoral politics, is the contemporary Democratic Party, which is not the same as the groups of people who are necessarily occupying a college campus or whatever. So, yeah, I mean, he's not going to get the vote of most American Jews because he's a Republican and because of who the Democrats like. I think he's trying the same thing he's been trying. I don't know. Megan?
What is the polling now, do we know, for Jews supporting Trump?
It's almost entirely Trump in the Orthodox world and almost entirely not Trump in the non-Orthodox world.
Really?
It's still Democrat.
Okay. I mean, it's interesting. I recently saw Douglas Murray speak. He's doing this tour.
Yeah, he was just on Barry Weiss.
Yeah. I did not realize that he was really almost doing exclusively Israel coverage and commentary for the last year. And he spoke at the Wiltern Theater here in Los Angeles, which is a huge venue. I mean, thousands, I don't know how many thousands of people it holds, huge old theater. And it was packed, sold out. And it was the Los Angeles Jewish community, coming out to see him. This was the Barry Weiss crowd. This was the Free Press crowd. I mean, Douglas Murray, who's not Jewish, obviously, but he walked out on stage.
He's a Philo-Semite like there isn't.
Yes, he is. Yes.
Mentioned in my article.
Okay.
Yes.
And it was as if Bruce Springsteen had walked on stage. I mean, it was like a rock show, standing ovation. The Free Press got mentioned just in passing in conversation, broke out in applause. So I'm getting a feeling, and this is anecdata, but that the Jewish community, whatever that means, not necessarily that they're leaning heavily Trump, but they are not liking the Democrats in the current state. I don't know how much the Free Press comment section represents any kind of meaningful voting block, but yeah, I think it's telling.
It's hard to say. I mean, I think we'll have to see how it all shakes out, because what looks to be happening is that the Democrats are just they want to absorb the anti-woke, Jewish or otherwise, and are trying to play up the whole we're the normal ones thing and all of that.
As much as people love Douglas Murray and his pro-Israelism, they don't necessarily are willing to extend that all the way to somebody who really has some anti-Semitic tendencies and some racist tendencies and is not afraid to say them. I mean, his weird threats to the Jews is really bizarre. You got to vote for me, because if you don't, it's going to be really bad for you. It's
not a very appealing strategy to win voters.
Another example of that was Leah Leibovitz in Tablet did an article saying we got to back Eric Adams, right? Because he was good for the Jews. So whatever is happening now, you got to stand by him because he was so good to us in the past. And I was like,
I saw that headline. I have not read the article,
but
so
batshit insane of a position to take. you may say that the charges are overblown. You may say this, you may say that, but to go and say, well, because he's been good, this is the slash and burn rhetoric that you get to say now that is going to endear you to a certain segment of the Jewish population. And it's the ickification of like the Jewish voter or the Jewish like appeal to stuff. I don't get it. It really bothers me. I'm curious if I can take a step back. I live in this bubble and I don't talk to people, but like October 7th was a big deal in the Jewish community, a very big deal. I was surprised that it was as big a deal in the mainstream media. I'm curious, as somebody who is a self-professed shiksa, like what is that day like? Was that something that like you woke up in the morning and it was in the news and you're like, oh yeah, or was it? Like,
I think Avi's talking about the commemoration.
The commemoration.
Oh, this October 7th. Sorry. Yes. Oh
sorry.
no, I mean it's
this week.
No, it feels like 9/11. I mean, I actually made a point of saying to somebody I work with, let's not send out like random email blasts today promoting our stuff because it's like would not be reading the room. Like let's be quiet today kind of thing.
Yeah, 9/11 seems a good...
like an interesting analogy.
Yeah.
But it's foreign, right? It's how 9/11 would have been seen in England, the year after, like 2002. I guess what I'm saying is it's not something that happened in America, but yet Americans are, Jewish or not, are still really, really aware of it.
No, I
find it interesting.
It's horrifying. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, it is like a horror that does feel close to home. They feel like these are Westerners, essentially, and we relate to them.
Yes,
I mean, it's like, obviously this kind of stuff happens all over the world, and we don't even hear about it. But the fact that we did hear about it, and everybody sort of knows somebody, and it does hit extremely close to home. No, it's horrific.
In Berlin, rumors are spreading.
Holocaust victims, their bodies are just dug up.
It's a shunda.
But the truth is even more unnerving.
Was your family in the Shoah?
Dude looks like he was in the Shoah.
As the world panics,
This is some ritual, bringing the dead back to life.
No, you said this wasn't illegal.
It isn't, I don't think.
one woman seeks the truth.
These are questions you can't answer.
And you're too afraid to even ask them.
Justice, a Holocaust zombie story. An original audio drama from the CJN in association with the Ashkenaz Foundation. Listen now at the cjn.ca/zombies or wherever you get your podcasts.
I do believe, Megan, you have been briefed on the intricacies of nachos and broigus.
Nachos and bagels.
Nachos and bagels.
Okay.
Are you more for the nacho bagel debate, like latke hamantaschen, right, Avi?
Yes, exactly. That's actually a good analogy.
Megan, nachos or bagels? No, what do you have to praise or pan this week, other than nobody wants this?
What do I have
the
to
aptly titled Nobody Wants This?
I know. I have been watching a lot of YouTube. I'm embarrassed to say, because I have recently moved my podcast, The Unspeakable, over to YouTube, because apparently this is what one must do in order to get the algorithm to give you the time of day. And I have discovered this YouTuber named Peter Santinello, who he is like a filmmaker. He just goes out. He goes all over the world, but largely in the US and Canada, and just interviews people in their communities. He'll go like deep into Appalachia, or to Amish, or to South Central LA, or, South side of Chicago, all over the place, rich, poor, in between, and just talk to people about their lives. And it is riveting. He has this like slightly heterodox sensibility, because he's just like, this is not about sides. Like, the issues people are dealing with are not partisan, but like, it's so deep and it's riveting. And he actually does one where he goes into an Orthodox home and, has Shabbat dinner with them. And there's a whole stuff with the camera and where the camera can be and what they can and cannot reveal. And apparently it was a huge, huge deal that he was able to do this with an Orthodox family. So anyway, he's been doing this for several years. He has hundreds of videos, and I highly recommend.
Phoebe, what do you have for us?
Well, I'm going to balance out the nachos with some broigus. And I'm going to unrecommend, although I don't know, half recommend, half unrecommend, this thing in the New York Times: our 6-year-old son hates eggs. Could a dozen French chefs change that? And It's this interactive, very much like the latest online journalism thing, where it's like an interactive feature. Clearly a lot of effort, I'm sure money was put into doing this on a lot of levels, because they literally fly with their 6-year-old to have all these French chefs try to get the 6-year-old to eat eggs. And people are really piling on this online because, like, ooh, fancy, you know, like if your kid doesn't like something, you fly to Paris, you jet to Paris, as if this isn't obviously some sort of journalistic endeavor and not just these are rich people, but whatever. It's kind of a funny premise. So part of me kind of liked it. And I should say I have a 3-year-old and an almost 6-year-old. And like, it's an interesting thought experiment. Like, the foods they don't like, would they eat them if they had, you know, Parisian chefs, whatever, make it for them? But then it's like, I also sort of start to feel really bad for the kid, because, like, you know how you don't want to make, like, the worst thing about yourself your personality, and you don't want to have, like, qualities in your childhood sort of etched in stone, and this comes up in all sorts of contexts. But in this case, like, let the 6-year-old not like eggs. Like, what's the problem? Like, I don't know. A part of me is just like, let the 6-year-old have his preferences, and it doesn't need to be blasted everywhere. But I also watched it and found it very entertaining. So I'm a hypocrite. And I have bad values, and I am not the hot rabbi on this podcast. So,
well, thank you for that. Judith Shulevitz, who I'm sure we are all familiar with, if not personally familiar with, just did a wonderful profile in The Atlantic of Zoya Cherkassky-Nadi, who, if you haven't heard of her, you should, because the title of the article is "The Israeli Artist Who Offends Everyone." Of all the people who should not be accused of making pro-Israel propaganda, this should be it, because by many accounts, she's not even Jewish. Yes, her father's Jewish, her mother isn't. She immigrated to Israel at a more advanced age. She is an incredible artist and is been accused of doing pro-Israel propaganda because she is documenting and painting about the horrors of what happened since October 7th. And she is somebody who really shouldn't be accused of that for so many reasons that I don't have to get into, because you are going to read the article and you're going to see how much she is a conflicted individual and shouldn't be put into one category or another, as nor should anybody, unless you're Douglas Murray. And go read it for yourself, realize that there's complexity and there is beauty that can come out of the ashes. There is poetry after the Holocaust to counter Adorno. But yes, and it is In the Eyes of Zoya Cherkassky-Nadi in The Atlantic by Judith Shulevitz. Thank you for listening to Bonjour Chai for the week ending September 12th, Shabbat Shabbaton. The show is produced by Michael Fraiman and edited by Zach Kauffman. The executive producer for CJN Podcast is Michael Fraiman. Our music is by So-Called. We are a project of the Jewish Living Lab and are distributed by the CJN Podcast Network. You can listen to all our past episodes on our page at thecjn.ca/bonjour, and you can subscribe to the podcast and automatically receive all episodes on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love it if you told a friend about Bonjour Chai. It is one of the best ways we get new listeners. And as always, you can email us with comments at bonjour@thecjn.ca.